Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, the co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Today, I'd like to visit about Syria again, but in particular about our State Department. There's been a recent report where the State Department was holding a press conference, and it tells you a little bit about how much our government respects us, and how interested they are in us knowing the truth. I want to go ahead now and play a little clip from that State Department briefing and give the audience, a sense of just how our government treats us.
With these weapons potentially ending up in the hands of extremists, is it a consequence that the U.S. is willing to accept in order to prop up rebel forces in Syria?
As it's an ongoing investigation, I just don't have a comment on that report.
It's a policy. It's not the only red flag out there.
Hi, there was a joint Al Jazeera New York Times report, rather I should say New York Times Al Jazeera report, alleging that some members of the Jordanian intelligence structure may have taken weapons intended for rebels fighting against the Assad regime and sold those weapons on the black market. What is this building's reaction? What conversations has it had with the Jordanian government? We all know that weapons turn up on the black market all the time, but given the complexity of the situation in Syria, it does raise some alarm bells.
Okay, so thanks for the question. We have no comment on that report. There is an ongoing investigation. The United States remains committed to Jordan's security and stability, and we're proud to stand side by side with Jordan in the global counter-ISIL coalition. But on that particular report, there's an ongoing investigation. I just can't speak to it, Roz.
The CIA does not comment either on its covert transfers of weapons, and yet it is a U.S. government policy. Who else should we ask about this?
As I said, I have no comment.
Well, Daniel, if that reassures the American people, there's something wrong with our people. But this should wake people up. We talk about how bad it is, the relationship between the government and the people. The people are upset and they're angry. Sometimes they have a hard time latching on to exactly what is the cause of the anger and the frustration. Of course, I talk a lot about economics and try to dissect that out, but this is on foreign policy. People, unfortunately, ignore foreign policy, and the media ignores it too, because as long as the neocons are into both parties, they just march on. But this is just outrageous. And just the attitude of our government explaining to these reporters, trying to get answers, should outrage the American people, because the last thing we're getting is the truth. We're supposed to be getting the truth from our government, and I don't think anybody believes our government levels with us, and it's part of the problem of this anger that the American people have.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are not superficial issues. These are deep, deep, consequential issues. Is the U.S. sending weapons to the so-called moderates in Syria that are ending up in the hands of ISIS or being sold on the black market to ISIS? This, if you want to talk about national security, this is a national security issue for the United States with blowback and all of these things. So these are serious questions. They deserve to be answered. And yet you have, and we didn't play the whole clip, but this is making a sensation on YouTube. Sadly, it's par for the course. But 3 or 4 more times, she said the exact same thing like a robot.
Yeah, right. But to me, it's this principle of lying. One of the worst crimes that an American citizen can commit is lying, to the government. Yeah. And people shouldn't lie. I mean, that's a moral issue too. But sometimes it's casual. Sometimes it has to do with stock transfers and insider tradings and FBI investigators. And if they can find one little thing, perjury, lying, they'll go to prison on that, in spite of the crime being very, very minor. So you don't lie to the government. Most people are terrified about that, and they're worried about that because they don't know how to handle, do I remember this correctly, and this sort of thing. So you need a team of lawyers to teach you how to protect yourself against a misinterpretation. But here, the government, I believe most Americans believe the government is not straightforward with us, and they lie to it. But is there ever a time when people might say, well, the government does it, The other day we talked about the government commits violence all the time. Why shouldn't the people commit violence if they want something? Well, the government's lying to us all the time. Some people might say, well, that's the way the world works. If they lie to us, maybe I can lie to the government. And of course, that's a very risky business because that's their protection. And this seems to be what's going right here on now, is because whether it's a briefing from the White House or from the State Department or congressional briefing that I was aware of, it's never to reveal the truth. And I think this clip we looked at reveals she didn't even pretend to give us information, ongoing investigations, national security, on and on what they hide behind. And yet big government marches on here with the abuse of our civil liberties here at home, and marches on with all this abuse overseas. This idea that our close ally, Jordan, said, could you imagine somebody in Jordan stealing our weapons and interfering with it and making money on the side? Couldn't possibly happen.
And the real question that wasn't asked, or certainly wasn't answered, is what were those weapons being shipped into Jordan for? Why are these weapons being shipped in? I remember, there's been so much talk about the Benghazi affair, and as you pointed out, no one really asked the real question, why were we there in the first place? But the other really good question, I'll always remember this, is that Senator Paul, when he was grilling Hillary, he asked her specifically about whether weapons from Libya were being shipped to Syria for the rebels. And Hillary did not like that question one bit. So I think he touched a raw nerve. The question is why, and why isn't anyone asking about it?
I know that individuals, whether they're Congress people or in the administration or whoever's being quizzed, if you're really asking the tough question, they have to feign total outrage, and I think that's what she was doing at the time. Totally outraged. How could you conceivably think that we would be involved in this or would permit this to happen? How it happened exactly, I don't think we have the details, but we do know that they went into Libya under false pretense of, saving the world and getting rid of a bad guy that we were friends with for all those years, and then it doesn't go well, and weapons end up in the other hands, and then the individuals decide, well, maybe we can send them to some rebels. It may be a plan, but it may be just, a multiple unintended consequence. Okay, yeah, we recognize they're bad guys. They're going to send them up to some other guys, but maybe some of our moderates will get it. And they're on our side because we're really on the side of ISIS and al-Qaeda, people who claim that they're really with us, but they'll fight our battles. They'll go in and get rid of Assad. And they probably just say, okay. One mistake compounds and makes another mistake. I think it's just like Mises talked about economics. You do one intervention to solve a problem, you get two new problems. And then you add on more regulation. Foreign policy, I think you'd agree. When you do one thing, it usually, blossoms and grows, and one problem gets into many, many problems. And I don't know if our country's ever been in such a complex mess. World War II and World War I was terrible on what could have been done otherwise. But at least it wasn't one of these things where it was so confusing and nobody knows who's who, So I think that part of it is we don't know what our government's doing, and they're doing whatever because they want to hide it. They don't want us to know the truth about how ridiculous foreign intervention is. I mean, the whole notion of us interfering in a civil strife, a world that has been disrupted with internal civil strife and religious fighting going on, not 100 years or 50 years, and we're going in there to settle it and nobody questions. Well, is this very smart? It's just bewildering that we, the people, tolerate this, because this is one area that's rather frustrating, that people say, well, Ron, you're okay, but you're too rigid. You don't want us to get involved in the internal affairs of anybody. Well, yeah, that happens to be true.
Well, I can see this is getting you a little hot under the collar, so I hesitate to introduce the second clip because this is going to make steam come out of your ears. But you mentioned lying in the past, and if we can get that second cue ready, but they don't even try to hide it anymore. And this is one of the most blatant things, if we can put this on.
A mantra from the president and everyone else in the administration has been no boots on the ground. And now
that is not true.
What?
It's just not true, Matt.
It is.
It's just not true.
It's true.
No, it's not.
Well,
I just flatly, absolutely disagree with you because I've been speaking to this when I was in uniform for over 2 years.
okay,
We are not obviously contemplating returning. We're not contemplating putting boots on the ground.
you're president.
Well, you mean they're not telling us truth here either?
But so blatant, you know. This was never the case that we wouldn't put boots on the ground. And there's another clip with Obama saying the exact same thing that Kerry said here. So it's just blatant now.
You know, it bothers me sometimes when they're blatant, like they're more honest. It's almost like honesty is now the conventional wisdom. For us to be blatantly dishonest with you is now ordinary, and therefore it's there should be no criticism. You know, I think that way back sometime, and I remember it so clearly when the Magna Carta was being written. The one purpose of the Magna Carta wasn't only to protect the rights of the individuals, but also to say that the king, and today our king is our government, had to be held to the same set of standards. If they disobeyed the law too, they should be held accountable. But just think of today, how unaccountable they are when you think about the thing going on with Hillary, and there's so many other things that they're never held accountable. They're a different system. And what about that statement that Rangel made about guns? You know, he said, well, yeah, people shouldn't have the guns, but by golly, I'm paraphrasing, of course, those guns, we need them. They need to protect us. And he was going to use a word that said, because we are special people, but then he modified it. I mean, that's an attitude, and the people have a right to be upset. The concern I have is, which direction are they going? Are they saying, well, what we need is non-intervention, what we need is more liberty, what we need is sound money? It's always more mischief, more doctoring up, and more planning, and more government imposing different kind of regulations. Modify the intervention, do people come up with the conclusion that many of us have? Get rid of central banking, get rid of the Fed. Oh no, we should think about this. Maybe it's time to raise interest rates 1/4 point. You know, this nonsense. And so often, though, the criticism is for people to be overly rigid. My answer to that is, they are over rigid. They're over rigid because they believe that intervention is good, and what they don't recognize, that if you grant the concept and the principle of welfare at home and warfare abroad, it's even though it's going to be moderate and limited, you concede the whole principle, and therefore it's only who's in charge of deciding where the lines are drawn, and it gets out of control. And that's why limited government for years have failed. That's what the founders worried about. You know, you give them an inch and they take a mile. Yeah. And I think people, they say, well, you're too dogmatic on your philosophy. Well, they're dogmatic too. You have the dogmatism of the left. People now can say they're socialists, and it doesn't seem to hurt anybody. And then others are dogmatic about deficit financing and printing money. That's a dogmatism. The dogmatism of liberty is that, yes, we're dogmatic that people ought to have their liberty, and they ought to be making up the decisions on how to run their lives and spend their money and when we go to war. So it just doesn't seem to me that these clips that we're showing could reassure anybody about what's going on. I hope it awakens some people, because a lot of people know darn well it's happening, but I'm sure the answer would be, well, what are we going to do about it? Ron, you've been up there messing around. What good have you done? You know, did you change anything when you were in Washington? I didn't expect to, and probably not, but I hope I changed a mind, 1 or 2 minds at a time, and that maybe that will lead, to a better life and a better chance for peace and prosperity.
Well, I think it was more than 1 or 2, but quite a bit more. But you talk about we should be free to make our decisions, and that's the essence of liberty. And that is true, and that's why these clips that we're playing, I think, are so important, because how can you make decisions about foreign policy when the government keeps you from knowing what it's doing? You know, and the stakes are so high in this shipment of weapons to Syria. We don't know where they're going. University of Oklahoma professor Josh Landis, who's a real expert on Syria, and is certainly a pro-Assad guy by a long stretch, he's estimated that about 80% of the weapons that we send over there end up in the hands of al-Qaeda or ISIS. And that's incredible. But if you think about how much worse it can get, and without us being able to exercise any oversight through our through our representatives or individually. Just about a week ago or so, ISIS shot down a Russian helicopter over Palmyra in Syria. And it's widely speculated, it was actually admitted that the ISIS was using a tow missile stolen from a U.S. shipment. So think about the stakes raising, U.S. weapons being used to blow up, and they killed 2 Russian pilots. So this is very serious, and we need to pay attention. They can't get away with lying like this.
Well, let's hope we can contribute to making this a more positive thing. Of course, we as a government shouldn't be in the weapons business, and it is their allies with the military-industrial complex that they're in business with, whether it's for war or selling weapons. So it's a real tragedy. But I think the strong message here is that we are continuing the fight against the propaganda, the lies told by governments, and the way they treat the American people into expecting them to roll over and listen to them and not say too much about it. But you know, when they have hearings or when they have commissions, it's designed for propaganda. Well, sometimes they're closed hearings, but really it's propaganda for the American people. And sometimes they want you to believe that this is conventional wisdom. Other times they want to hide it. When it gets hot and heavy, they get upset. But they don't want to reveal the secrets that really are important, like the transfer of weapons and what's really behind our policy of foreign interventionism. Because I think then they would, have a hard time defending themselves. But anyway, we will here at the Liberty Report continue to do our very best to reveal what is going on, and in a way, give the people some incentive to look more into this and to find out exactly why are they doing this. If our economic policy is literally stupid, why do we do it forever and ever? If debt is not good, why do we keep doing it? If getting involved in the Middle East leads to the mess that we have, whether it's Syria, Ukraine, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, all these places, it's never ending. We never see a reversal. It's always trying to patch it up. Oh, boots on the ground again. Yeah, did they ever leave? No, they never left. And do they say what they're doing? No, they won't, level with us. But the truth is, the CIA and the military personnel, the special forces, they're there. We're way too much involved. So I'm going to stick to the principle of non-intervention because I believe it's the best thing for world peace. I believe it's the best thing for our liberty here at home. I believe it's the best thing for prosperity, not only here at home, throughout the world. If more countries and more people would want to emulate us if we ever get around to setting a good standard. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.